All right, continuing on from my previous video, people complaining about new Trek because it's woke and how ridiculous that is. Here's some examples of woke Trek from the past. So, very first episode of the very first pilot of the very first Star Trek series had a woman second in command, showing that woman could be in command. When they retooled that show, you had a black woman on the bridge, showing that black people and women can be in positions of authority. They had Russians and Japanese people on the bridge of the ship at a time when, the Russians were our enemies and the Japanese were our enemies in the recent past, and many people still held significant prejudice against them. There was explicit incidences of racial hatred that were punished by the captain when it was found out that the Vulcans and Romulans were related. One of the crew members was racist towards Spock, and the captain kicked him off the bridge. Obviously, there's the famous episode where people are black on one side of the face and the other race of people from that planet are black on the other side of the face. And because of that small difference that wasn't even perceptible to humans, they committed a genocide against each other. Jungle wars in Asia, which obviously was a reference to Vietnam, were condemned. So were the episodes where the Klingons and the Federation were both trying to arm other less developed people, and how horrible that was. Other incidences from the original series were, obviously the interracial kiss between Kirk and Uhura, something that was challenging the conventions of the times. I'm sure there's many, many more that aren't coming to me right now. This isn't scripted. You look at the Next Generation and, you have, again, women in places of authority, although perhaps less good than the original series in that sometimes with the roles they gave the women. They had men and women dressing in the same uniforms, both, traditional men's clothes of pants, and, occasionally men would wear dresses on the first few seasons of that series. You had one of the most famous episodes of all was, about android Data trying to prove to people that he deserved rights. The fact that the Federation, this advanced society that Gene Roddenberry created, did not offer those rights to obviously sentient, intelligent beings. They had to be fought for in court. Allegories for multiple, civil rights and other types of lawsuits that have happened. Similarly, Data, explicitly saying, I have allowed my child to select its own gender and appearance, or sex and appearance. In that same episode, Whoopi Goldberg, refused to say when a man and a woman fall in love, said two people fall in love. You had the doctor, had a male Trill lover who became a female Trill. And the fact that the Trill was now female wasn't actually the problem. It was just the fact that it was a different person, and that's what she couldn't handle. And changing the gender of the lover had no real effect on her. Obviously many, many other episodes of Next Generation looked at social things. You look at Deep Space Nine, similarly, Jadzia is no longer Curzon. Curzon was an old man. Jadzia was a young woman. People accepted her when she met her old Klingon friends, and they initially used her former name, and she just simply told them, hey, this is my new name. And these Klingons, who are, not exactly paragons of, shall we say, progressivism, immediately accepted her, and that's her new name. There was an episode where the disabled person in the wheelchair, was basically said, I get to decide how and to what extent I am accommodated, or you are accommodating for me. I'm not going, I'm telling you this is how it's going to be. Obviously in the movies, it was made clear that they could fix Geordi's eyes well before he chose to do so, and he preferred his accommodation. His disability was accommodated in the way that he preferred, and then eventually when he decided that he wanted to have a more cosmetic correction of his condition, he chose to do that. Nobody forced him to do that. Obviously, back to Deep Space Nine, we had a black captain. That was controversial at the time. Some people didn't like that. And we have Voyager, we have a woman captain. No, some people didn't like that. So, Star Trek was designed to be progressive. And now, 20, 30 years later, there are new areas of progressivism that sadly Star Trek actually was behind the times on. Certain things, LGBTQ things, they were, I believe, actually cowards in the late 90s for not addressing those things as much as they should, and now they've made up for that. They continue to make up for that on the current Star Trek series. They continue to make up for disability representation. political things. If you look at the economic system envisioned by Gene Roddenberry, it's explicitly communist. It's a communist system, and they explore that. We've gotten rid of profit. We've gotten rid of corporations. We now, with the whole benefit ourselves and all of humanity. That is what Star Trek was always about. So if you don't like the new Star Trek, it's not because it's woke. I mean, it's always woke. It was made to be woke. It wasn't like this was some men's club sexist show. I mean, of course, there was some of that stuff in it because it was a part of its time, but it was trying to not be that. It was trying to examine that, and it continues to examine that. But just because your minds have been closed since 1987 doesn't mean the rest of us haven't, examined things that at that time in 87 we wouldn't think about as being something we need to worry about. Now we know. Now we know times have changed. We have learned from people, from marginalized people, that we need to examine many things that we didn't examine in the past. And because Star Trek continues that brave tradition, and you don't like it because of that, or you don't think that that's accurate enough, in the future we wouldn't have these things. This non-human is too fat. I mean, it's not even a human. And even if it were a human person, who cares? Just criticize the show if it has bad writing, bad stories, bad acting, bad production, not because it's woke. Grow up and watch a show that's not woke if you don't like wokeness, okay?